Welcome back, everybody, to more from the Sable Eyes. I'm here today with Jordan. How are you doing, Jordan?
Pretty good.
That's good. I changed my inflection on that one. I thought I'd mix it up a little bit, like, gotta keep it on.
Yeah,
keep you on your toes. You never know. We're here at our final or second to last, or we're right at the end of our testing at the moment for all the random decks that we're looking at. And today we're having a look at TinaChomp Malamar, which has potential to be quite a good deck. Garchomp Giratina tag team coming out in Unified Minds, doing 160 plus 80 for Pokemon that have damage counters on them. You can potentially knock out anything in the game, so it's definitely worth looking at. I don't know why we've waited so long.
Yeah, it's actually probably the card I was most hyped for from this new set when I first heard about it. It just seemed like a stronger Ultra Necrozma to me overall. It was like, it does more damage than Ultra for cheaper, and you don't discard the energy. That's insane.
That's
obviously
it's really good.
It takes a little more to set it up. You need to actually have damage counters on the board to be able to do it, but that's honestly not hard to do.
No, certainly not. We'll run through the list now and have a chat about some of the inclusions we've included in this particular list to make it work a bit better. Starting off, of course, with the obligatory 4/4 Malamar line. This list attacks with Psychic Energy, so Malamar is going to be the card that's going to get those energy onto the field. Like Ultra Necrozma, we're able to discard Psychics and attach them to our Garchomp Giratina, and then we just attach we manually attach a Fighting Energy onto it, and we are suddenly doing those big knockouts for large damage.
And unlike some other Malamar decks, for example, Ultra Necrozma, you want 2 to 3 Malamar in play pretty much every game, but for this list, I feel like you can get away with 2 Malamar a lot better than other decks can, because with just 2 Malamar, and obviously an attachment from hand, you can reach your maximum damage output. So we're still going to play the 4/4, obviously, because why wouldn't you? But you can get away with sometimes missing a Malamar or 2.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like we're going to be prohibited from attacking or taking knockouts if we only have the 2 Malamar. Sometimes Ultra can get itself into positions where your opponent's targeting down Malamars and it struggles to take return knockouts. Whereas this deck, we can realistically, with 2 Malamar in play, which is not unreasonable, take a big knockout on pretty much anything in the game. So super, super powerful. And hey, what would a Malamar deck be without 2 copies of Distortion Door Giratina? This card is... I'm just gonna lay it out on the line, Jordan. I think this card's probably one of the best cards, if not the best card in the game.
Well, for me, as soon as Rescue Stretcher rotated, as soon as I realized Rescue Stretcher was rotating, I was like, well, Giratina is just the best card now. It gets itself out of the discard pile. No other card can do that.
Yeah, exactly.
And I would say, doesn't matter what build of Malamar you're playing. You could be playing Malamar Spell Tag, you could be playing Ultra, you could be playing this build with Giratina Garchomp, but no matter what build you're playing, I feel like Giratina is going to realistically be your main attacker for the most part in almost any Malamar deck.
Yeah, it has all the magic numbers. It has 130 HP, which is the baseline for a great non-GX attacker, and it also happens to do 130 damage as well, which means that it can not only knock out other non-GXs for the most part, but it is also going to put on some real pressure to those big tag teams, half-hitting pretty much everything in the game. Obviously, there is the downside of putting 4 damage counters onto this card when you attack, but those 4 damage counters rarely come up. The 130 damage is just too good to turn away, and the fact that we can recycle them infinitely throughout the game means that we are never concerned about who our attacker is going to be. If we get 3 Malamars in play as well as a Giratina, then we don't even care if we get stamped to 1, because we've still got an attacker, and we will do until such a time as the game is over.
And what's even better about Giratina in this list specifically is the fact that Distortion Door is super important, not only just for dealing damage across the board for Giratina maps, but you need to have at least 1 damage counter on the defending Pokemon to be able to knock it out with Giratina Garchomp's regular attack. So using Distortion Door to spread damage around your opponent's board is still strong in this deck, even though you're not using Sky Scorching Light. It's just going to make it super easy to take 1-hit KOs on almost anything.
Certainly will. And we also, obviously, the titular Giratina Garchomp is in the list, but we only really play 1. It's interesting because it's like, how can you call the deck Giratina or TinaChomp Malamar if you're only playing 1 of them? Well, realistically, you only ever really need 1. You use Giratina for the first half of the game. Maybe take a couple of prizes, set up all of your damage counters on the board, and then Garchomp and Giratina comes in with Calamitous Slash, doing 240 to anything that has damage counters on it. And hey, if it survives from there, then you've got bigger problems.
It's very actually similar to Ultra Necrozma in the sense that you only really need to attack with it once or twice for the most part. You're going to be using Giratina when you're not attacking with this, and unlike Ultra Necrozma, this card is much more likely to survive a turn, so I would say the one copy of Giratina Garchomp is very similar to having 2 copies of an Ultra Necrozma.
It certainly is. We've got another tag team in this list as well. We've decided to run 1 copy of Espeon and Deoxys GX. This card is here specifically for Cross Division GX, which is going to allow us to place 10 damage counters on our opponent's field, but if we have an extra 3 energy, we'll be putting extra 10, we'll be putting 20 damage counters anywhere we like on our opponent's field. And this is our answer to Ultra Necrozma's GX attack. We obviously can't use Sky Scorch in this list because we don't have it, so Cross Division is the next best thing.
Obviously, it's not quite as strong as Sky Scorch, mainly because it's weak to Psychic and has 260 HP, so you never really want to have it down against a Giratina deck unless you're either stopping them from getting Giratina out or you're winning the game. But it's just a really strong effect for Malamar decks to have to be able to spread damage counters around, and does have synergy with that Garchomp Giratina. If you put 30 damage on a couple of Reshizards, then all of a sudden they're going to be in KO range from your Giratina Garchomp's attack. But it's also just really nice having a tech attacker like this Espeon Deoxys that's going to really give you a big swing in a Shedinja matchup.
Yeah, if you're stuck in that matchup, then you're going to be able to take multiple prizes on one of those turns in order to lock your opponent out of winning the game. It's also worth noting that Psychic Club is also an attack that you can use 10 plus 30 more for each of your benched Psychic Pokemon. Most of the Pokemon in the deck are Psychic, so in a pinch, you are able to attack with that particular attack, but, you know, sometimes it might not necessarily be the best option, especially because, like you mentioned, of that 260 HP, that's 3 prizes just waiting to be taken by someone else. The list also plays 1 copy of Ditto Prism. This card is super versatile in this list. Not only does it allow you to have a 5th Inkay, which is super important, but it also allows us to play one of the really cool tech attackers in this list that I really like, that is Aerodactyl GX. Aerodactyl GX has been my kind of pet card since it came out. I really want it to work, it just seems really good, but I can't get it to do anything. But hey, it's in the list here, and it actually helps in a ton of matchups. Its ability means that your opponent needs an extra energy on each of its on its attacker in order to attack into it, which means against Shedinja, those Orangaroos need an extra energy to use its attack to shuffle cards into the deck. Against things like Reshizard, it needs an extra card, an extra energy, 5 energy attached to it to do 230. Against Pikarom, it needs 4. There's lots of things that this deck really can screw around with numbers with, and Aerodactyl, I think, is super fun, even if it's just for its ability.
It's really funny that Aerodactyl in this list feels so much stronger than it did when we were testing just a straight Aerodactyl list.
I know, right?
I mean, it's definitely a good card, and we've all agreed on that multiple times, but it didn't feel like it was quite right holding the spotlight. But here is a backup attacker with that Ditto, which Ditto is a card we see in Malamar pretty often. People just like playing Ditto as a 5th Inkay, but in this list, obviously, it's even stronger, allowing us to get the benefits of that Aerodactyl GX. Super strong attacker against Pikarom specifically, if you're already struggling with that matchup, which is not a bad matchup, but it's certainly one of the harder matchups. The Aerodactyl is definitely going to swing it for you if you can get it at the right time. And as you mentioned already, the ability, almost all of the big attackers in the format right now are basic Pokemon, so you're going to be able to force them to pay a little extra to get their attacks off. I wouldn't say it's going to completely screw any decks over, but it's definitely going to be pretty annoying for your opponents to deal with if they're not prepared for it.
Yeah, it'll make them commit when maybe they didn't want to. It's also worth noting that its GX attack is probably the best straight damage GX attack in the deck. Obviously, we want to save Cross Division because that is very powerful, but Aerodactyl GX can just do 50 times the amount of energy on your opponent's Pokemon and just do a big swing there. Another cool thing as well that synergizes quite nicely with this deck, even if the attacks and ability didn't is the fact that Aerodactyl has free retreat. So you don't even need to have a Jirachi on the field with a skateboard. Hint, we're playing 3 copies of Jirachi. That you don't even need to have those with the skateboards on them. You can just go into your Aerodactyl, use Psychic Recharge, and then retreat into a Giratina or even your TinaChomp.
Yeah, free retreat is really important in this deck because obviously some people are playing cards like Absol or Lysander Labs that can make it a little awkward to retreat with your Jirachis, but Absol only increases the retreat cost of basic Pokemon, so Aerodactyl being a stage 1 will make sure that you're always able to pull off your Psychic Recharges onto the specified target. Unless it's the Aerodactyl, you're going to be able to pull it off every turn, and obviously 3 Jirachi is pretty good to have in the list as well. It's not the 4 of count that we're playing in some other Malamar lists. You did need to cut a couple cards to fit some of these techs like the Aerodactyl and the SP Deoxys, but 3 is still enough to be able to find it when you need it most of the time, and also it's going to be a pretty reliable opener.
Yeah, it certainly is. 3 is not a bad number to have. Usually you're only going to have 1 or 2 on the field anyway, so it's mainly just to ensure that you're giving yourself the best odds to get it in the first set of 7 that you have, so that you can have it as your opener. Stellar Wish is a super, super powerful ability, especially in this format where Reset Stamp is rearing its head, because it means that we're not going to get ourselves locked out by a stamp to 1. We give ourselves an extra 5 cards to potentially find a card to get out of it. Jirachi is just super, super good. But hey, let's not sit here and talk about Jirachi. Let's talk about 2 other cards that we know are really, really good, Mew and Dedenne GX. We've talked about these a lot. Both of these cards super powerful, and Mew, especially in this list, being able to snipe 10 damage onto 3 different Pokemon to potentially set up knockouts for Garchomp Giratina, means that it has that extra use again.
Yeah, I would say Mew is almost like I'd probably say it's the 3rd most reliable attacker in this deck behind Giratina and, both Giratinas, honestly, the tag team and the regular. Reliably going to be a pretty solid attacker in almost any matchup that you need to do more than 160 damage in, because sometimes Distortion Door can be a little awkward. Your opponent can keep the Pokemon that they want to keep healthy in the active, and you're forced to KO it. You can use Mew to set up that, not only the knockout on the active Pokemon, but also set up future knockouts at the same time. And it's just going to be really strong for mapping your prize cards correctly. And Dedenne, obviously, also very important card. In Malamar decks in general, it's going to allow you to get you set up pretty quickly, discard Psychic Energy and Giratina as fast as you usually be able to. And I don't know, I personally at least just really like having a searchable consistency card that you don't need communication for.
Yeah, that's the critical bit. We can search this out with something like a Cherish Ball and just rip a new 6 cards and see what we get. But yeah, no, it's a super, super consistent way of putting more cards in the discard as well as drawing more into our hand. Speaking of consistency cards, this list is super, super easy when it comes to its supporter line. The deck plays 4 copies of Lily, which is, of course, the optimal amount if you're trying to get Lily in turn 1. And it also plays 4 copies of Cynthia, and that's it. We've just got lots of draw cards in this particular deck. Obviously, with Guzma rotating, we don't really feel the need for any extra supporters. The argument could be made to potentially add in some Erica, because obviously there are lots of decks that are trying to set up big benches, but at the moment, these 8 supporter cards are probably the only 8 that the deck ever really needs to play.
Well, hey, they're the 2 best supporters in the game right now, I would say. I think most people would be happy to agree with that statement, so may as well just play 4 copies of each of those. I do really like Erica in this deck as well, just because, obviously, Erica does have pretty good synergy with cards like Jirachi, just being able to build up a big hand and have a whole bunch of different resources and options in hand to work with, but you can't argue with the consistency of the 4 Lily, 4 Cynthia. They're always going to be good no matter what the scenario is.
Yeah, exactly. No matter what cards you have in your hand, you're going to be able to draw some. Moving on to the items, this list has one of the most consistent Pokemon search options of any in the format. The same as Ultra Necrozma, we can use Mysterious Treasure to search out not only our supporting Pokemon, but also our main attacker as well. Garchomp and Giratina, of course, being Dragon type means that it is searchable by Mysterious Treasure. Obviously, things like Aerodactyl are not going to be able to be searched by it. but that's okay because we're finding almost every other Pokemon. The list also plays 4 copies of Pokemon Communication and 1 copy of Cherish Ball. Both of these ball search cards are going to be able to find Pokemon when you need them, and since we've got a large number of Pokemon Communication is going to be particularly useful.
Yeah, with Mysterious Treasure and the Cherish Ball, you can pretty much search for every card in this deck. Obviously, Treasure is going to get some of your tech attackers like the Mew and the Espeon Deoxys, and Cherish Ball can find not only your tag team attackers but also the Aerodactyl GX. So realistically, the only card you might struggle to find a little bit might be that Ditto Prism. Almost every card in the deck is searchable with either Cherish Ball or Mysterious Treasure. Even that Dedenne GX that you can get with Cherish Ball, you can't get Mysterious Treasure. But regardless, if you've got one of these search cards in your hand, you're going to be able to find the Pokemon you want almost every time.
Yeah, and if you can't find the Pokemon that you want, then normally having a Jirachi in the active will do the job. And because we've got a Jirachi in the active, we're going to be playing 2 copies of Escape Board and 3 copies of Switch. This has become a bit of a default support line for those Jirachi, and in Malamar, obviously, we want to be able to switch our Pokemon in and out of the active, so these 5 cards are going to be our go-to to make sure that we can power up our attackers and get them into the active where they're doing their big damage.
And what's also nice is, unlike Ultra Necrozma, Giratina does not discard any energy when it attacks, so you're not going to need to waste your switches every turn. If your Ultra Necrozma survives in the active, you're not going to have to switch it to the bench to power it up again and bring it back into the active. You can just leave it in the active and keep attacking, so you can kind of savor those switches for more important uses, such as if you get hit by a status condition or you just want to have a really important Stellar Wish trigger. So the switches, while we're not playing 4 like some other lists are, we kind of don't need them as often either.
Yeah, we certainly don't. Another card that is going to help power up our Garchomp and Giratina's attack is 3 copies of Spell Tag. We're going to be attacking with Giratina in the early game, the baby, so we want to use Spell Tags on those. Not only are we doing 130 damage, but we're also, when we get knocked out, putting that pressure on with Spell Tag. And it means that we can get some knockouts on things like maybe Mews or potentially other Inkays that will stop our opponents from powering up their side of the board, and then will enable us to take big knockouts with Garchomp and Giratina down the track.
And even though Spell Tag doesn't work on Garchomp Giratina since it's a Dragon type, it does have heaps of synergy with it. Not only obviously for big attack, it's obviously gonna pretty much fix your maps for that almost any time you are able to trigger it. But it's also actually not bad for Giratina's first attack, the Snipe attack. You can put some damage counters on the Jirachi and then just pick them off for 40 damage later on with your Giratina Garchomp's first attack, and that's a pretty easy way to get a cheap prize that your opponent might not be expecting.
Yeah, we have to remember Garchomp Giratina does have linear attack for 40 damage, so if Mew isn't in play, you could potentially set yourself up some knockouts there. This list also plays 4 copies of Custom Catcher. Because we've got a big attacker that wants to take big knockouts, we need to make sure that the right knockout is in the active. The last thing we want to do is to do 240 damage to something that has 60 HP. We want to make sure that we're taking appropriately large knockouts. So custom catchering out a couple of big targets in a game would be super great. We've got Jirachi to help us find multiple custom catcher in a turn, so it's not unlikely for us to be using this at least once to do a big 240 to another tag team.
And what's also nice about custom catcher in this deck is if you're versing a Pokemon that's or an opponent who has a big Pokemon in the active that has no damage counters on it, and you can't quite knock it out with your Giratina Garchomp, you can always just gust it down onto the bench, use Distortion Door on it while it's on the bench to kind of set it up for your Giratina Garchomp later on, and then you don't have to deal with taking on an unnecessary 2-hit KO when you can pretty easily take a 1-hit KO on it later on anyway.
Yeah, that's true, and we've of course got 1 copy of Reset Stamp. Like every deck in the format, we need to play this card. It means that if our opponents get a little bit too far in front, we can stamp them and bring them back to our level. It also means that we can potentially remove important resources from our opponent's hand and give ourselves a chance to win a game that has gone down to the wire.
It really sucks only seeing 1 copy of Reset Stamp in decks like this, because it's just such an important card, and obviously you're not going to have to discard it too often, but I always feel uncomfortable when I'm running Reset Stamp as only a one of in the same list I'm running it to Dedenne. Obviously, you're going to have to discard at some games. And in this specific list, we've tried to not go too techy. We want to keep our counts as high as possible, so only one reset stamp is just going to have to be good enough for this list.
Yeah, that's true. And another card that could be considered a consistency card for this list is Viridian Forest. This is our stadium of choice for this list. We want to be able to find and discard energy, and Viridian allows us to do both. We can discard a Psychic Energy with Viridian Forest in order to search out a Fighting one, attach the Fighting, use Malamar's Psychic Recharge to put the Psychic onto the Giratina Garchomp, and then we are away and attacking. So Viridian Forest, probably the best stadium card for this particular list, and again, it would be great to see an extra one of these in here because it is so important.
Yeah, Viridian Forest is definitely the best stadium card for any Malamar deck. I don't remember the last time I saw a Malamar deck playing a stadium that wasn't Viridian Forest. It's just that good, and it has even more use when you are playing multiple different types of energy to be able to search out those tech fighting energy that you've really running a small account on, or the metal energy for Ultra Necrozma is really important.
Yeah, that's 100% correct, and like you said, we're only running a small number of fighting energy. We have 2 copies here. That's going to be enough to attack with 1 TinaChomp and 1 Aerodactyl in a game, so we don't want to be limiting ourselves by putting in more fighting energy. We would rather see a higher count of psychic energy because it's going to allow Giratina to attack as well as Malamar to become more potent. So we run 7 copies of psychic and 2 of fighting. Obviously, if you wanted to increase the fighting count, then you would be more likely to be able to attack with Garchomp Giratina, but hey, you only really need 2, and that's the amount we've put in the list.
Yeah, you've got 1 fighting energy for the Aerodactyl GX, 1 fighting energy for the TinaChomp tag team, and I would say it's not even that common for you to use both in the same game. Like, sure, you might every now and again, but for the most part, you're probably only going to end up using one or the other of those 2 cards, so it's only really 1 fighting energy that you ever need each game, and in theory, you can search for it on the turn you need it with Viridian Forest. You're not always going to have Viridian Forest, but I'd say the chances of drawing it manually and, of course, being able to search for it when you need it means that 2 is probably going to be fine for the most part.
Yeah, 2 will probably be enough. This deck is certainly very powerful, and when you're doing 240 damage in a turn, of course you're going to say that. But the question is always going to be, can it beat Ultra Necrozma? Ultra Necrozma, we believe, Jordan, is probably one of, if not the best deck in the format. So if we can manage to beat it with this, then hey, I reckon this is a pretty good option. Personally, I would say this deck probably has better matchups across the board, but if you can't beat Ultra, then is it worth playing?
Yeah, I mean, Ultra Necrozma is just known as being the best Malamar variant at beating other Malamar variants specifically. It's kind of the reason why people aren't playing the other ones quite as much as you'd expect, because they're just not quite as good at dealing with Sky Scorching Light as you'd think. But with this list, we've got a few ways of dealing with it. We've got some spread damage with Distortion Doors and spell tags, and of course Mew if we need to, and also linear attack on Giratina Garchomp, and also Espeon Deoxys GX attack to place 100 or 200 damage counts. We've got a lot of ways to potentially steal games against Ultra Necrozma, and placing damage counts smartly could be all we need to win those matchups.
It certainly could. It's a real high consideration for us for World Championships. Very powerful and could potentially go all the way. But hey, thanks Jordan for coming along and sharing this one with us.
No problem.
And thanks everyone for watching. If you like the content, then click the sable eye in the middle of the screen. Just click it, alright? Don't ask me why. Just do it. And then on the left, we've got some videos that YouTube thinks that you'll like. On the right hand side, we have our Unified Minds World Training Center playlist for more videos like this, as well as some matchups along the way. Thanks everyone for coming along, and we'll see you all next time for more from the Sable Eyes. Bye.